Seriously, guys, every time I film, the dog is always right here, and just off the camera is the cat. In every single one of these videos, they are here. Hi, if you're new to the channel, my name is Erin, and this is my series, So You Wanna Move to Mexico, where I take a year's worth of trial and error and learning and mistakes and distill it all into a 7-part video series that is intended to help you as you plan for or research a move to Mexico. This is my dog PETA, and my old cat Oliver is over there. Today I want to talk about, is the Mexican dream a fairy tale? Oof. Let's start talking about some myths and common misconceptions about living in Mexico. As you know, there is one acceptable story to tell about Mexico on the internet, and that is, it's perfect. It's gonna solve all your problems, and if you don't like anything about living here, then you are a terrible person. If you've spent any time on the Facebook groups, you know this. You have seen this play out dozens of times. If you read comments on any video, whether it's on my channel or the Tangerine Travels or the Kennons, don't read the comments, guys. It's a bad place. You know that you can only say one thing about Mexico or suffer the consequences. And people want that storyline. People love to fantasize about moving to Mexico. And here's the thing. I love Mexico. If you've watched any of my videos, you know I love Mexico. But I don't believe that paradise exists on planet Earth anywhere. And so I don't expect Mexico to be utopia. And I don't think you should either, because I think if you go into it with these expectations that it's gonna be this fantasy destination, it's gonna be a real place and you're gonna be disappointed. But if you go into it with some realistic expectations, then I think you'll be a little bit more open to all the beautiful, wonderful adventures and experiences that it will give you. All right, myth number 1, you will find a slower pace of life when you move to Mexico. This is a very pervasive myth about life in Mexico, and from my experience, the pace of your life is determined by your work, not where you live. So if you've got a busy job, you're gonna be busy in Mexico. If you don't have a busy job, you can have a slower pace in Mexico, but you could also have a slower pace in the United States as well. It all depends on what do you have to get done to pay your bills. That is what determines the pace of your life, not where you live. And people really don't want to hear this because there is such a deeply ingrained belief that things are just slower and more laid back and relaxed in Mexico, which absolutely can be the case, but it also might not turn out that way. I know plenty of Mexicans who are hustling. They are busy. They've got deadlines. They've got stuff to do, right? Not everybody's sitting around drinking margaritas in the afternoon. I think part of the issue is that a lot of times our information about life in Mexico comes from people who are retired here, which is amazing and wonderful. Good for you. However, when we fantasize about that life, we might not be fantasizing about Mexico, we might be fantasizing about being retired. This really hit home for me. Toward the end of our time in Mexico, I was reading the book On Mexican Time, which is a wonderful book. I totally recommend it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. And I was reading this book And I was like, oh my gosh, this book makes me want to move to Mexico. And I was living in Mexico. That's how different the experience was for me reading this book about Mexico, about San Miguel de Allende. I lived in Guanajuato City, like an hour and a half away from San Miguel. And I wanted the life that I was reading about in the book while I lived in Mexico. And what I realized is, the reason that I don't have that life is because Jesse and I are working a lot. And that's just how it happened. We are not retired. We are not independently wealthy. We work to pay our bills. We were so lucky that Jesse's business really boomed. The year that we lived in Mexico, he had more work than we've ever had from his business, which was great for our budget. However, what that meant is he was way busier than he ever was with the business. And YouTube, which started as a hobby, kind of exploded and became something that I never really intended it to become. And that was a lot of fun, and I liked it, which is why I kept pouring more time and energy into it. But we suddenly had this lifestyle where both of us were just working all the time. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is what we left the US to get away from. And the funny thing is that in some ways, we moved from Mexico to the United States to get a slower pace of life. Because where we live near grandparents. And we have help. We have childcare. We have a great school that Harper is really enjoying. Little things are easier here. Grocery shopping is easier. Getting around is easier. There's a lot of stuff about our life right now that is easier and more relaxed and simpler and slower than it ever was in Mexico, which is crazy. So yeah, be careful that you don't mistake living in Mexico and being retired, because not everybody in Mexico is retired and has that lifestyle. There is a little bit of truth in that, which is to say that things happening on a time schedule is not as culturally important in Mexico as it is in the United States. And sometimes that is really nice. Like for instance, I am a very stressed out person about being on time. And in Mexico, I learned to relax about that. It never fully went away, but I did get to a point by the end where I just wasn't like getting all worked up about being super on time to things. It was okay. I think it's kind of healthier. However, when the situation is reversed and you're waiting on, say, somebody to come repair your kitchen sink, then the flexible relationship with time can be honestly a little bit frustrating. Myth number 2. Nobody's obsessed about money in Mexico. I think we have this idea that the US is just totally obsessed with money all the time and people in Mexico just aren't. And I think there's something to be said for cultural differences when it comes to money and status, but I don't think that we're as culturally different as everybody likes to say we are. People got bills. People got to pay the bills. People work just as hard in Mexico, if not harder, than they do in the US. The next myth is that it's 100% safe all the time unless you are involved in the cartel. Now, this is not a video about safety. I have made another video about safety. You can watch that one for longer, more extended thoughts about safety in Mexico. However, I do think it is a little naive to believe that nothing bad can happen in Mexico, that you are somehow awarded this special protection status because you're a foreigner. that, you know, everybody is your friend and is looking out for you. You know, Mexico is a real place with real problems. It is not utopia. Utopia doesn't exist anywhere. Nowhere is a paradise. Yes, the United States is not a paradise either. And I think it's time that we stop pretending like Mexico is somehow a fantasy land where crime doesn't happen. It does happen. It can happen. And that doesn't mean you have to be terrified about it. It just means you need to be informed and you need to do everything you can to make sure that you stay as safe as possible. There is a big difference between being realistic and living in fear. You can absolutely be informed, realistic, not naive about where you're living, and you can still be perfectly fine. It doesn't mean that you're panicked. It doesn't mean that you're living in fear. It just means that you are aware of the realities of where you're living. There, I said it. All right, next on the list, the food is always fresh and all natural and probably organic. And this is not a comment on any other YouTubers, but this is a comment on a lot of stuff I read on Facebook groups that is just flat out wrong. I think a lot of times when we don't understand something, we either assume the best or assume the worst case scenario, and most of the time neither of those is true. I think a lot of times people come in and they think, because I'm shopping in the market, it must be like grown from a little grandma in her backyard and it's all organic and all natural, and guys, it probably isn't. Doesn't mean it's not great food. You're gonna eat wonderful food in Mexico, the best food of your life. Yeah, it's probably not organic. It's probably not fundamentally different from food you're eating at home. And there is this myth that you're gonna move to Mexico and like all your health problems are gonna disappear and that everybody's healthier in Mexico. And the truth of the matter is that you don't know. You might have some health issues that get better in Mexico. You might have health issues that get worse in Mexico. And there's really no way to know before you do it. Some people come to Mexico and certain health issues that they were dealing with in the United States get better. And that is wonderful. That is amazing. If that has happened to you, I am so glad. Like, that's great. However, don't take that to mean that it happens for everyone. For example, the year we lived in Mexico, I got sick way more than I normally do in the US. I had more stomach bugs, I caught more colds. I don't know, was it air quality issues? Was it the food? Was I eating out too much? I know here in the US, I eat a lot better, frankly, because I cook a lot more. Our kitchen in Guanajuato was so small. The oven was so bad. Guys, it was rough. I love to cook and I hated cooking in that kitchen. And so because of that, and combined with the fact that the food was so good and so cheap, we ate out all the time. Here in the US, it's freaking expensive to eat out, so we don't do it very often. And at home, I fix loads of vegetables and we eat a lot healthier than we do when we eat out. Maybe that had something to do with it, or it could be stress. In a lot of ways, my life in Mexico was a lot more stressful than my life right now is. That can certainly affect your immune system. Or maybe it was random chance. Maybe I had a year where I just got sick more often. It happens, and there's no way to know whether it was connected to Mexico or not. I think the common thread through a lot of these points is that Mexico is just a place. It's a wonderful place. It's a beautiful place. It's a place where I had a great life, a hard and stressful life, especially at the end, but I loved it. I loved my life in Mexico. But it's just a country. It's not a fantasy. And I think a lot of people online treat it as a fantasy. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair for the people who are weighing the pros and cons of a move to Mexico. And I don't think it's fair to Mexico, because Mexico is a real place with real people. And sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. And that's totally fine, because it never has to be perfect. Mexico does not have to be perfect to be wonderful. And what I worry is people get a fantasy version online, and then I'm worried they go to Mexico and it is a real place, a real country, and they may feel disappointed. When I think if you have more realistic expectations, then you won't be so surprised when Mexico turns out to be a real place with good things and bad things and neutral things and weird things and all the things. And you'll be more open to some of the peculiar beauties of life in Mexico. Okay, and my last point is the myth that it's going to be exactly the same as living in the United States, only cheaper. Especially when you first move to Mexico, you're so blown away by the prices that you tend to talk about that a lot. And so I think a lot of people get the notion that, wow, you can get all the same stuff that you're getting in the United States, in Mexico, for so much cheaper. And life there is just gonna be the same, only more tacos and less money to spend on things. And it's not. And that's not a bad thing, but living in Mexico is fundamentally its own thing. It is not like moving to another city in the United States. There are challenges that come with it. There are emotional challenges that come with moving to a foreign country. There's logistical challenges. There's a whole host of things that are going to be different in ways that you have no idea until you're there. Or until you come back home and you realize like, oh wow, yeah, that's really different. And I don't know if enough people are emotionally prepared for that when they come to Mexico. It is not like moving to a city in the United States that just has more tacos. It is moving to an entirely different country. Now, I've just spent the whole video saying Mexico is just a country like anywhere else. But I do want to impress on you that yes, things are cheaper, and that's really fun, especially when you're coming from a place like the United States where things can be so expensive. But don't focus so much on the cost of living that you miss what a monumental move this could be. So, is the Mexican dream a fairy tale? Yes, it is a fairy tale. It doesn't exist. However, you can still move to Mexico and have an amazing and magical time. I just hope that you can go into it with a little more of a realistic idea of what it is and what it isn't. If you want more information about moving to Mexico, I will leave a link to my website in the description box below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to this channel and hit the little bell so you're notified when the next video in this series comes out. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.